Our top story tonight, Palestinian militant group and ruler of the Gaza Strip Hamas has called for a comprehensive resistance and an armed struggle to confront Israel's plans to annex large parts of the occupied West Bank. Hamas has warned that Israeli annexation in the occupied West Bank would be, and I quote here, a declaration of war. The analysts say that the militant organization must weigh the cost of a new fight. In recent weeks, protests have been happening in the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip almost on a daily basis. There has been an outpour of resentment against US President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. The Israeli government is expected to decide from the 1st of July on the implementation of Trump's plan. As the clock ticks, Hamas, which has fought 3 wars against Israel since 2007, is seeking to define its strategy in the face of the latest challenge. Despite a 2018 truce, Hamas and Israel still trade fire from time to time. On Friday, Israeli Air Force jets struck Hamas positions in Gaza. This after rockets were fired from the territory towards Israel for the first time since early May. Hamas's military wing had warned that annexation would prompt a war. We're now being joined by international affairs expert Jody Cohen live from Ra'anana in Israel. Jody, thank you so much for being with us. I want to begin by asking, you see the situation at this point in time. Even the European Union has collectively said that this annexation should not go unchallenged. But Israel is on its own timetable when it comes to discussing it on the 1st of July.
Right. So this is a very complex issue, as you can see. It goes back not just from 1948, but earlier than that. And I think it's important to recognize both sides of the story in order to get a full understanding of the situation on the ground. So on the one hand, you've got the Palestinians who say that this is land that is going to be designated towards a Palestinian state, and that if Israel annexes any of this area, that it is stealing their lands, and that they wouldn't have enough space for a future Palestinian state. And as you said, they've been threatening attacks, suicide attacks, even the possibility of war. And certainly at the beginning of a day of rage on the 1st of July, which is the deadline that Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has set to announce what's going to be happening and to start with annexation process, or as Israel would say, acknowledging sovereignty. Now, the reason I'm going to go into that is because from Israel's perspective, Israel says it has historic ties with these lands going back to the biblical times when they were known in the Bible as Judea and Samaria. Then roll forward to 1948, when the UN declared the modern state of Israel. And some of these lands were designated towards the Jewish state and some were designated towards the Arab state. But Israel says that the Arabs didn't, they weren't known as the Palestinians at the time, but the Arabs didn't accept that agreement, and it led to a war. So in fact, Jordan was one of the countries that attacked Israel in 1948 and managed to get control of Judea and Samaria, and that is why it's now known today as the West Bank, because these are the lands on the west of the River Jordan, next to Jordan. Now in 1967, Jordan again attacked Israel. This was before the days of peace between Jordan and Israel, and Israel managed to get those lands back and get control of them. And then under the Oslo Accords of the 1990s, it was suggested that 70% of those lands, that's areas A and B, could go towards a potential future Palestinian state, and that 30% of them would stay under Israel's control. And the reason for that is because Israel has been adamant that for its security, it needs to retain control of the Jordan Valley, which is the strip of the land between Israel and Jordan. And also because the Israeli settlements in that area are 100% Israeli communities, And Israel argues that it was never envisaged that those areas would be part of any future Palestinian state. So that's like a quick, I mean, thousands of years actually.
Jody, at this stage, what I want to ask you is that we're past all of that, and at this stage today in 2020, the question is how much of the current peace will sustain itself if Israel were to move ahead with the annexation?
That's a good question. Up until the last few days, President Trump's peace deal suggests that Israel can retain control of the Jordan Valley and the Israeli settlement blocks. And that was what we were talking about when we were hearing about potential annexation and the plans. Over the last few days, we've been hearing that because of the opposition from the Palestinians, but also from Jordan, who have been threatening to end the peace agreements with Israel, and also, importantly, from the Gulf states. There's a warming of ties between Israel and the Gulf states, and that's important to Israel. And as a result of that opposition, we're now hearing that potentially what the annexation or sovereignty, depending on your perspective, would entail would be, rather than annexing all the Jordan Valley and the Israeli community settlements, potentially Israel will announce that it will declare sovereignty over Ma'ale Adumim, which is just next to Jerusalem, the Etzion block, which is south of Jerusalem, and Ariel. And it will be interesting to see what the Gulf states, what Jordan will say. But perhaps that's some sort of behind the channels negotiation of, okay, let's leave the Jordan Valley for a future negotiations, perhaps. And it will be interesting to see what the Arab states who have friendlier relations with Israel, how they react to that.
Right.
But we will know more in the next few days.
Right. But for now, the all-important Palestinian state, Hamas, has, in a sense, declared war if Israel were to move ahead with annexation. Now, that's a pretty clear call coming in from Hamas. Not that there haven't been rockets fired across the border or attacks taking place in the reverse from Israel on Gaza Strip. But the question here is that with Hamas making it that clear, are we looking at violence that's more imminent and more immediate, so to speak?
Potentially, that is one option. And I actually think that Hamas declaring this, this is going to lead to war, sort of illustrates Israel's perspective, because Israel is saying, we recognize that the Palestinian people have make a claim to want to have their own state, but Israel needs to enable that state, ensuring its own security. So we already saw when Israel withdrew from Gaza that Hamas moved in, and there's been a continual rocket attacks and battles between Gaza and Hamas in Gaza and Israel ever since. So Israelis are understandably skeptical that if they come out of the land that they won't get rockets fired back in return. And I think it's also really important to look at the perspective that the size of the whole of Israel is similar in size to the state of Meghalaya. So it's a really tiny piece of land we're talking about, which underscores also why Israel is so keen, so set on ensuring its security.
Jody Cohen, international affairs expert, joining us live from Ra'anana in Israel. Thank you so much for being with us here on the broadcast on WION World as well.